Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. We are back with our teen and life resilience coach, Liezel joining us here, better known as My Teen Life Coach. That's also her website. Check it out, myteenlifecoach.com. Welcome back. How are you?
Thanks, Jill. Awesome. I'm really good. I'm glad school's beginning to start.
This week?
Next week.
Oh my
Or the week
goodness.
just after that. But I think, most of the schools are starting within the next week and a half. Yes.
I understand. I got two little ones home, but they're also in camp. So I get it. So please introduce yourself. Obviously, you're a mom, first and foremost.
So I am a professional teen coach. We also are called resilience coaches. And I am the founder of myteenlifecoach.com. I am a faculty member of the Youth Coaching Institute and, of course, a mom of 3 teenagers myself.
Wow.
And you guys can always reach us on the website. I've had some amazing conversations and calls from people who have been calling in, listening to the podcast, Jill. So it's been wonderful to be able to share this with the audience.
Great. Thank you. And I know each and every week we speak, we always kind of have an area of focus. Did you have something for us today?
Yeah. So every week I'm kind of polling my clients because they really are the voice that wants to be heard. And I do consider myself to be kind of a representative of what they are maybe not comfortable saying or don't really know how to say. So I always like to tell them, hey, I'm representing you guys. What do you want me to bring up in the world and for the audience? And this week was a particularly interesting one. I kind of do like a poll. And so I had a number of young adults, actually college age. So we're focusing more on college age kiddos this week. And I guess if I were to summarize what they were telling me, it was, we don't believe in and or trust the adults' role modeling of how we are supposed to prepare for ourselves in the world for the future. And some of them were like, I don't believe in capitalism. Some of them were, I don't like the mess that you grown-ups have left for us. For some of them, it comes out as you've left us a mess to deal with, and now we're just feeling just like the levels of hope are not as high. So I thought that was a pretty interesting statement. And of course, knowing me, I was like, well, let me just be curious about this and figure out, what is behind all of these kinds of feelings. So once I did some research, I realized that there is low confidence in the global adult role modeling for kids. And when I thought about what is the why behind this, I went back and looked at what has happened in our world, in particular, obviously, the American population. And there were 15, I think I identified on my notes here, 15 very significant things that were Debbie Downers for them. Right. So there's the adult perception, but then there's the teen perception. And so I wanted to quickly mention what those 15 are for them. Right. Remember, this is not the adult audience. This is their perception of things. And then, what does that mean? So I'll quickly jump down into what they are. And of course, most of us will understand and know what those are. But there were a couple of surprises for me. And I'll tell you the ones that I think were surprises for me. So I'll start with the first one. So knowing that most Gen Z kids were born in the late 1990s, right? So the first significant thing was obviously 2000, which was Y2K. And a lot of people will wonder, why Y2K? Why would the teenagers today bring Y2K up? Well, because the parents talk about it. They talk about how the double digit zero would cause this digital breakdown, and therefore there was this apocalyptic fear in the adult world, right? So then, if you've had kids, obviously chatter at the dinner table and stuff like that, these types of fears are discussed, or like at family gatherings. Then the next significant thing after that was the dot-com bubble burst. And that was huge in terms of the economic downturn. And adults, again, were in fight, flight, and freeze mode. So, again, the adults were living their lives out of fear, and there was a trauma response, right? The third significant one, which of course nobody needs to really talk about, is 911. And that was ultimate trauma for all of us, the 9/11 event.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth one was then the business scandals. Now, this one was a surprise for me because when the whole business scandals and the integrity and the trust of our business leaders were questioned and compromised, of course, families who are in the fintech world, in the finance world, in the banking world, that would have been family conversations. That would have been conversations around college and, no more college funds, and we have to downsize and move. And so expectations that were created would have now been uh, burst, right? So that was the fourth one, which I guess thinking about it, you're not surprised, but then you wouldn't think that teenagers today would actually bring that up. Then, of course, the fifth one was the smartphone came into our world, and we started to begin to normalize addiction to smart devices, and then obviously all the anxiety that came from that. And it wasn't the anxiety around you're on your phone the whole time. It was when there was this, if you remember, fear around stalking and cyberbullying, and it just opened up this whole other platform of predatory behavior. So, of course, parents became paranoid in their parenting style around, how do we manage this whole smartphone world? So then, of course, after that, social media was born. We've spoken about that in infinitum. So we already know what's happened there. But that was another indicator that addiction, fear, and living a virtual reality started to become a norm. Then, of course, in 2008, 2009, another recession hit. And that one is significant because people are still recovering from that. So that is a normal conversation in your average middle class home. And then, of course, most recently is your everything around the social injustices. So if I remember clearly, my teens were 13, 14, 15 years old when the police brutality stuff came on the news, when LGBTQ rights started to be voiced more, gun control issues started to be on the news more. Then the whole, sexual assaults in the media and in the entertainment world, that started to get a voice. And so when I asked the teenagers, what do you get out of that? The sentiment is teens are confused about why adults did not recognize the issues around these things. Why were adults not recognizing them? They were kind of just shoving it down, right? And of course, I'm speaking in the most broadest sense. Then, of course, after that, student loans became normalized. So now we're sitting with a huge student loan debt across the country. That has affected them, and that's at the top of their minds. Then, of course, we started with mass shootings. And they actually did a research study that most kids now, if they hear a pop or a bang, they automatically duck. So it is normalized behavior. This environment is now normal for them. So, of course, addiction, fear, anxiety has led to normalizing vaping, the video games, the opioids, the self prescriptions, and the self diagnostics. Oh, I have ADHD. I have anxiety disorder, but it's normalized to self-diagnose all of those things. Then, of course, we had, first black president, politics started to get polarized. Now our teenagers start to have a voice. And when the George Floyd thing happened and all of that, you actually saw them in the streets protesting, right? And
Yep.
then, of course, you've got COVID on top of all of that. So it's 15 things. So if you think about a kid who would have been born in the year 2000, between the year 2000 and now, so they would be 20 years old, 15 to 20 years old, they've experienced these things as a trickle down from leadership, from parents, from family gatherings, from
Yeah.
all the different stuff, right? So then I ask myself the question, okay, I cannot be surprised that our teenagers as a whole don't feel well. They don't feel safe. They are overwhelmed with all of this. What do I do with this stuff?
Hmm.
They then, because we as adults and parents don't have the answers always. So, because we're uncertain, they're uncertain. And most of us as adults are projecting our fears unknowingly onto our children, right? Oh no, we can't do this because we can't do this because I'm too stressed. I've got to find another job because, right? And what happens is that innocent space and world of the, what would have been different 30, 40 years ago no longer is. There is no longer that ignorance is bliss for that small period of time in these kids' lives. And so then, it's funny because adults will say, oh, they are entitled, they know so much more. When I was that age, I didn't even know what anxiety meant, right? Well, we know why. It is the adult world that has created this environment for them. And it's interesting to me that in many cases, we don't take accountability as adults.
Wow.
So I ask you the question, like, do you see the proof of that in your family and friends, like just the way people are talking and stuff?
Well, yeah, you've really got me thinking, and I hope our listeners as well. There is a lot that has happened the past 15 years, my goodness. And that could affect them because everyone's talking about this generation being so lazy, not
Right,
motivated, not going out getting jobs, still living home with their parents, not
right.
work ethic is down. Why? Never thought about it. I mean, clearly you think that, well, it's the parents, but what are we doing wrong? What can we be doing better? How do we instill this? You know, I was working since I was 12, and then my boyfriend's son's 23 and he's still not working like full time. And it's just bizarre. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, so he gets to go to Greece for the summer for 3 months every year? Like, that's got to stop soon. He's got to have responsibilities. And there's a lot of enabling out there and babying. And it's just, I try my best not to be that way with my kids. You never
Mhm.
know the cards you're dealt with. Now, how do your kids feel about the world and about
Same.
work?
Yeah,
And
so it's also interesting, right? Three kids, three completely different ways of coping with things. And also, one of the things that I was going to mention is how do we reconstruct our memories? So, often you'll have two siblings who are sitting next to each other and they will have two completely different accounts of how you were raised,
yeah,
right? And that's part of the what I call the cognitive bias or the fallible thought processes that are going on, because the way that I will like describe my kids and how we were raised, how we went through the divorce process in our family, what the different experiences of trauma were, are four different stories between me and my three kids.
yeah.
So, because we do experience it differently, and I have to admit that at the time that I was going through the stress of life, I was not thinking about how do I project or portray this over to the kids, whether it's conscious or not? And how am I creating the memories for them so that when they are older, they're going to talk about it accurately or in a way that we can actually put some objectivity to it. So for example, some of the cognitive behavioral thoughts are that are like messed up is based on your emotional distortion. So let's say you've got two kids. Let's say my two oldest kids. One was an introvert and quiet. So when we went through stress and I was a single mom, et cetera, he went down and quiet and he was just absorbing, absorbing, absorbing. My second oldest child, on the other hand, was all out there, threw tantrums, was voicing her discontent with the world, and got it out there, right? So now, as young adults, how are they dealing with it? Because at the time,
Yeah.
I was not prepared for, educated. I don't know, we can put whatever words in there. How did I not kind of read between the lines for them and think futuristically, right? And that doesn't mean we're bad parents, doesn't mean any of that stuff, but it's just becoming aware now. And so I was thinking to myself, like, here's some of the interesting statements that I hear is, my brother was always the favorite. No, he wasn't. He wasn't, but there's this story, right? Or you never came to my games. These are the cognitive bias distortions. Or she always lied because I was always the one in trouble.
Uh,
Right. And so it's like those kinds of things where I think it's important for us to sit with them and go, hang on a minute, let's talk about these things. But what I know I do as a parent is I'll be like, okay, whatever. You want to think that. It's like your life. And because we don't want to deal. And then they start to internalize those things. So that's where I suck comes in. I'm stupid. I don't care. The world is dying, so why should I even bother? They start to internalize the things that they used to talk externally about when they were younger.
oh, wow.
So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. But I did come up with a few things that I was like, I specifically always think about you, Jill, because
Thank you.
you're always bringing up the next generation. Like, what could Jill do to reconstruct how, you,
What are my kids called again? They're
they are the alphas.
alphas. Okay.
Yes. And so yeah, to reconstruct how they are going to remember things, I think we need to, number one, there's this term going around in business right now called VUCA. We live in a VUCA world. It's
Never even heard of
volatile.
it. Okay.
Yeah, so it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. So
Oh.
volatile, yes, absolutely. Uncertain, yes, absolutely. Complex. Now, there's an interesting thing. There's a difference between complex and complicated. So
Mhm.
complicated means it's difficult, but the status of it doesn't change very much over time. Complex means it's complicated and its status is changing all the time. So complex is a little bit more than complicated. And then, of course, ambiguity is just part of living, right?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, what would I tell Jill to do? So now everybody can take out their pens and papers if they want to. But the first thing I thought about and had read, Tim Elmore is one of my favorite parent authors. So I got a little bit of this from him as well. Is I think it's important during this VUCA time to talk to the kids about silver linings, that silver linings are real, that there is a good and a positive that comes out of things, that whether, we're going through a tough time now, but you're going to build resilience, or because I'm forcing you to be independent now means you're going to not be lazy one day. There's always a way to turn it around so that we can talk to them about like what could be better coming out of this situation. So
Mhm.
that would be my number one thing. The other one is, yeah, times are tough, but just like we do in academic coaching, we do what we remember I said last week, chunking. You break the situation down into smaller pieces. So maybe it's not we got to get through this week. Maybe it's we get through the day.
Yeah.
Maybe let's get through school. Maybe it just let's get through this next hour, right? So really helping them to understand that it doesn't have to be this massive big elephant that we have to deal with, which I think is what the young adults feel. They feel like there's this massive, you know, ripple effect from all of this stuff, and they've got to like take it all on.
Yeah.
Whereas all we want to say to them is, no, just take your life on, take your school on, just take your routine on, break it down to small and manageable, right? And then the cognitive distortion stuff, I think, is really important because adults do it too. The more we are traumatized by something, the more we like exaggerate or make it something that it's not, so that it can justify how we're feeling. But just because we're justifying how it's making us feel doesn't make it true or doesn't make it real. So there's a whole body of work on cognitive bias and cognitive distortions, but it is about what evidence is there to prove that you feel this way, that your brother has always been the favorite. What's the
Yeah.
evidence? Let's talk about that, right? So with the young ones, when they start to say things where you're like, what? Like, where did that come from? Like,
Yeah.
stop and deal with it right away. So there's this thing called bandwagon bias. It's like, all my friends said so, therefore it must be true. So that happens a lot when they're at school. And then there's this like one of the other ones that I like, that's one of my favorite, is the anchoring bias. It's like, I feel this way, therefore it must be. And so those are like, there's many of them, but that's like, those are two that kind of makes it kind of concrete for us to talk about, right? And then the other one is, I think it's important for us to help them remember how they used to be successful. Like when they were little kids, like remember how you used to get A's, and that is
Yeah.
still in there. And that is still, there was a time that things were simple, that it can be simple
Yeah.
again. So you can kind of combine the silver linings with, what did past success look like for you? With my clients, very often, excuse me, I will help them remember when was the last time that they felt hopeful or felt good about something or felt like they were in control of their life. And then we, instead of trying to replicate that, we take the elements of it and we say, how can we replicate those things for you?
Oh,
And that's an empowering kind of conversation, right? And also, the other part is what we call psychological distancing or externalizing. So let's say a kid came to you and they were like, I just don't know how I'm going to pass. I've got to do these things, and I'm not smart like the other kids, and I don't see how I'm going to do this. And the way that as coaches, as that we externalize this is we'll say to them, well, if it was your best friend, how would you advise them? So you're taking their problem and you're taking it and putting it outside of their body into a different setting and saying, if you were the friend, or if you were the mom, if you were the, that person helping that person, what would you say to them? And then help them bring it back into their space, right? So that's
makes
kind of a
sense.
cool one. Yeah, I like that one a lot. And then yeah. And then, okay. And then the other thing is storytelling. You know, we forget about our roots and how our grandparents would tell us stories, or if we were sitting around the table. And I know that it's still very prevalent in the third world cultures and countries and tribes. I so wish that we kept that in our first world mindsets and our westernized mindsets. We we now rely on Disney to help us remember what those were. So I just think, telling the stories about, how we've overcome things in the past, and, or how resilient we are as a family in general, etc. And then, of course, the authoritarian parent style. It's not okay for everybody to get gold stars. Kids have to deal with the fact that you're not always going to be an A student. You are sometimes going to fail a test. You cannot live at this unattainable phase or not be achieving or motivated at all and still getting gold stars, right? Both extremes are not healthy. So, you're not always going to be all gold stars, but you can't do nothing and expect gold stars.
Yeah.
That's a big, big deal. And then the last one is the one thing that was in your and my lifetime before this era was the recognition of self-care and what self-care really means and what self-care really looks like. I think the teenagers today are beginning to learn what that means. I know that even us as adults, we still struggle. We still think being a workaholic is like the best way to do it. And it depends on how we've carried that down to our kids, you know? So self-care, self-care, self-care. You and I both know that's non-negotiable, but
I got my nails done finally.
there you go.
Well, I did a month ago, and then I usually wait, and it goes a few months, but I actually got them done. Yeah.
I gave up on mine.
Nice. Yeah.
So that's like it. That's what I think the thing is for this week. I think we need to go back and have these conversations with our kiddos and sit with them and be real, you know?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So if we want to reach out to you for a consult, Liezel, how do we do that?
You can email me at liezel.lane, Liezel.lane, Lane, at myteenlifecoach.com, or go to the website, myteenlifecoach.com, and there's a form there. You can text me or call me at 770-235-8202, and check us out on just Google it.
Just Google, like just Google, like at this point, just Google.
Yeah.
Liezel, Liezel Lane.
There you go.
Well, thank you for being here as always. Pleasure speaking with you, and got to think about those alphas. All right. Thank you for the advice.
Absolutely. And I'll see you next week.
You got it. Have a great day, honey. Thank you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.